Last September, a professor of African Studies at George Washington University, Jessica Krug, admitted to faking African and Latina heritage for her entire adult life. She was apparently about to be outed as a race faker and decided to get ahead of the news by admitting that she was, quote, a culture leech. According to friends, Krug was militant and aggressive about her stances against systemic racism, going so far as to pick fights in public with other white women and expecting her black friends to back her up. Clearly, Krug thought that by identifying as black, this allowed her to claim the moral high ground from all those white devils, and lend her more expertise and street cred in her career as an African studies professor. Rachel Dolezal, famously outed after years of pretending to be black, also benefited from her fake identity. She was the head of an NAACP chapter. And who could forget Senator Elizabeth Warren, who was listed as a minority professor at Harvard for years because she thought her high cheekbones made her a Native American. She was later hilariously trolled by Trump, who convinced her to take a DNA test, which she actually bragged about, saying it confirmed that she is at most 1/64th Native American. This really isn't a hard phenomenon to figure out. The more you give certain groups in society special rights and privileges, from the moral high ground to salaries and jobs, the more this will bring the worst type of people out of the woodwork to take advantage. In the context of two recent studies, it all makes perfect sense. Here, the science confirms what we intuitively know, that bad people take advantage of other people's best intentions to gain power. You've probably heard of virtue signaling, when somebody tries to show how morally superior they are because of some cause that they claim to care about. For example, the Instagram influencers caught staging photos of them helping to clean up after a riot, or a company that tweets out support for gay rights only during Pride Month. They are signaling that they are virtuous and thus reaping the material and social rewards of being part of the woke crowd. But this new research indicates that these social justice warriors might not be so well-intentioned. The Journal of Personality and Social Psychology recently published a paper which analyzed the results of a number of studies on victimhood and virtue signaling. The paper is called Signaling Virtuous Victimhood as Indicators of Dark Triad Personalities. The dark triad personalities are narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. The study found that individuals with these traits are more likely to signal virtuousness and victimhood. That means psychopaths, narcissists, and shrewd opportunists take advantage of the social climate for their own gain. And it's not just sympathy or social status that they gain. The benefits of virtue signaling include real, tangible gains in resources, as evidenced by the three white posers that we discussed. That's because the US is now an environment in which it is, according to the study, increasingly advantageous and even fashionable to be considered a victim. It is also used as a way to gain moral immunity for deceit, intimidation, or even violence by alleged victims to achieve their goals. In other words, the ends justify the means. As long as you claim to have a noble intention, it can excuse any amount of terrible behavior in the name of that goal. And that is why Black Lives Matter embeds its admittedly Marxist goals in the vehicle of racial justice. Signaling support for disenfranchised groups is a shortcut to get ahead in today's world. This obviously doesn't mean that every woke person is a psychopath. Some of them surely have the best intentions. But this study confirms that when society gives some people special rights and privileges, bad people will always take advantage of it. Coupled with another study that was released a couple years back, we can understand perfectly the woke threat coming out of the belly of the beast, Washington, D.C. The study, called Psychopathy by State, found that the concentration of psychopaths in Washington, D.C. was far higher than any other state. The presence of psychopaths in the District of Columbia is consistent with the conjecture that psychopaths are likely to be effective in the political sphere. Psychos are drawn to power, and it's not just that power corrupts. It's that already corrupt people seek power. Government is just the best industry to be in for somebody with no morals. The study surveyed samples from the lower 48 states and Washington, D.C. to find the prevalence of personality traits which correspond with psychopathy. Of course, D.C. came in first by far. But as the author notes, that's not necessarily a fair comparison because Washington, D.C. is a city compared to entire states. The study finds that more urban areas in general correspond to more psychopathic personality traits. Another interesting finding is that a higher prevalence of lawyers predicts higher psychopathy levels. Shocking, I know. So, removing DC, can you guess which 3 states come in the top places for the concentration of psychopaths? Number 1, Connecticut. Number 2, California. Number 3, New Jersey. The least psychopathic states are number 1, West Virginia. Number 2, Vermont. Number 3, Tennessee. Number 4, North Carolina. And number 5, New Mexico. And it should not be surprising that the main correlation was the state with the lowest percentage of people living in urban areas also had the lowest concentration of psychopaths. Perhaps psychopaths need to be around more victims or constantly switch out their friends and acquaintances as they become aware of their antisocial behavior. It's possible that psychopaths are more easily recognized and ostracized in more tight-knit rural communities. The study concludes, areas of the United States that are measured to be the most psychopathic are those in the Northeast and other similarly populated regions. The least psychopathic are predominantly rural areas. The District of Columbia is measured to be far more psychopathic than any individual state in the country, a fact that can be readily explained either by its very high population density or by the type of person who may be drawn to a literal seat of power. Hailing originally from Massachusetts, I can attest to the highest corresponding personality trait being temperamental and uninhibited. Where do you think the term masshole came from? If you aren't a psychopath when you arrive in the state, you soon become one just from the traffic alone. And I wonder if just being in such close proximity to other people makes it a necessary adaptation to care a little bit less about how your actions affect other people. The solution to all of this is to not give a single inch to these virtue signaling psychopaths. Don't engage them. Don't fall into their traps. Don't apologize for being white, Christian, straight, privileged, or whatever. That's a race to the bottom. And the best thing that we can do is either entirely ignore these virtue signaling psychopaths or relentlessly make fun of them with memes. What you don't want to do is go in the other direction and become the self-fulfilling prophecy by actually becoming racist. Remember, this is a small group of fringe people trying to force everybody else to self-segregate or identify with a victim group. Just keep in mind that this narrative is being driven by elitist white liberals, some of whom go so far as to fake being a victim themselves. The other thing you can do is self-select the group that you associate with and live around. I've been doing this for years, and the only time I actually see these ridiculous race baiters and woke mobsters is online. Remember, the media will take a tiny minority opinion, present it as if it's mainstream, and try to build it into a movement. It's still dangerous since the minority can, and in many places does, take over and set policy. It's still important to call attention to the cult, voice your concerns with it to make sure it doesn't catch on, to make sure that the other people around you know that not everybody agrees with this virtue signaling psychopathy. But I don't actually know any woke mobsters in real life, which is either a testament to the power of self-selecting the type of people you surround yourself with, or it means, as I suspect, that there aren't actually that many people who think like this. And finally, living in a more rural area or in a tight-knit suburban community, which again you have specifically selected, can help alleviate some of these problems. Like the study says, these people tend to concentrate in cities, so being more rural does remove you from their reach to some extent. Thanks for watching. I'm Joe Jarvis. Come back and see me again soon.